Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's webinar, Leveraging Your Authentic Leadership Style to Cultivate Team Effectiveness. My name is Elizabeth White and I'm the team lead of learning and development with the Work Wellness Institute, and I will be hosting and moderating today's webinar. I would like to start things off by acknowledging that I have the privilege to live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. We would like to thank our academic team and our 9 founding partner organizations in the Harnessing Talent Project. Harnessing Talent Alliance for Recruiting and Retaining Canadians with Disabilities and Mental Health Challenges is a 3-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada. And this webinar is made possible through the support of ESDC as well as memberships to WWI. So we'd like to also thank our advisory committee and speakers who contribute to this webinar series. So without further ado, I will move to introducing our speaker today that we're very excited to have. Erica Nacarado is joining us today, and she is a management consultant, coach, and former varsity athlete currently specializing in assisting her clients with building and leading high-performing teams. With a master's degree in industrial organizational psychology, Erica is motivated to understand what drives effectiveness and alignment in professional teams and how to sustain these aspects through authentic, empathetic leadership. This motivation stems from her time in competitive volleyball, where she became fascinated with understanding human complexity and how it relates to team dynamic. Erica has spent her career working with C-suite level executives, helping them understand how their inherent personality traits, behaviors, and values inform team culture and inspire their team members to achieve organizational goals. Erica also spends her time volunteering with various volleyball clubs and leads Coachettes, a program she developed that empowers and inspires 15 to 18-year-old female athletes to become coaches. So I will now pass things over to Erica, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And thank you very much to Work Wellness Institute for having me today. It's really exciting. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I'm excited to just have a little conversation with you all about leadership, our views of leadership, and then how that impacts how we are leaders and showcase leaders in our day-to-day lives. And again, also how that impacts our teams. So we're gonna have some fun today, and feel free to ask as many questions as you want as we go. I'm happy to share my contact information afterwards if anyone would like to reach out to me afterwards. But for the time being, feel free to pop in any questions that you may have. I'm happy to answer them. All right. So just again, we've gone through introduction and opening remarks. This is me. Elizabeth gave me a really great introduction, so I don't think I need to add anything else. Other than, again, this is some content that I'm really passionate about. I share this day to day with my clients in my current day job, as well as I've shared some of this content with the young volleyball players that I do coach and mentor as well. And I think it's just a really applicable topic throughout all facets of life. So a quick agenda of what we're going to talk about. So ultimately, we're going to go through a lot of stuff today. We're going to go through a lot of content. It's really just a quick run of what could potentially be a really long leadership journey, and hopefully I can provide you with some either tools or even just motivation or inspiration to begin or continue on your journey to figuring out what's the best version of myself, and what is my authentic leadership style, and how can I show up every day the best I can for my team. So we'll start off by talking about what leadership means to all of us. So get ready. I'm going to ask you to pop in the chat some reflections, and we'll spend no more than 3 minutes talking about it. So if you're not a particularly chatty person, then we won't spend too much time berating you for some answers. But get ready to do participate in this. We're going to talk about a theory that I do really like, authentic leadership theory, to really ground us in what we're talking about today, and how we can leverage some of the tools that I'll then share with you about how to really identify that. And again, of course, some benefits and some impacts of how leading authentically really does help your team and help you create a better team culture overall, just from simply being yourself. And then we'll have some Q&A. All right. And Elizabeth is doing the awesome duty of monitoring the chat for me. So I've told her lovingly to just like cut me off if we have any questions that are pressing. So feel free to just jump in at any time. Okay. Some quick learning outcomes that I'd really like you all to leave with today. So the first one is we are going to talk about authentic leadership, and I am using a theory to really assist us in understanding it. But I want you to leave with a practical understanding of how to leverage this theory and how to leverage the pillars of authentic leadership that we will be talking about. So we'll talk about some practical examples and how it does show up in action in real life, and how you can cultivate your authentic leadership style each day. Some of the tools that we are going to be presenting to you, or I'll be talking to you about today. So one of them is included in a handout that will be shared after the webinar. I also believe that it is included or posted on this platform that we can take a look at. So I have a list of questions that you can ask yourself for some reflective practice. We're also going to talk about psychometric assessments. So I have a background in psychometric assessments. I did some work there at the beginning of my career. I've been a big fan ever since, and I do think that it is necessary to leverage in order to really just get a really good understanding of yourself. So we can talk about how those work, and I can share with you some assessments that I really like and recommend. And then finally, motivation, right? Hopefully after hearing this, at least one of you will get some motivation or inspiration to, again, begin or continue your journey towards identifying and coining your personal and authentic leadership style. Again, solely just with the objective of showing up as your genuine self every day. Okay. All right. I also have two screens, so just mind me looking over to your left or right, whatever shows up on GoToWebinar as I'm talking. So first and foremost, before we start talking about authentic leadership style or any leadership theory, let's talk about what leadership means to us. And I think leadership is a really personal definition. I think it's a really personal experience. And one reason being is that, most of you, if not all of you on this webinar, throughout your entire life, you've been exposed to different types of leaders, different leadership traits, probably since childhood, right? Teachers, supervisors, coaches, managers, your parents, right? You've been exposed to what does leadership look like in all forms throughout from a very, very young age. And whether you like it or not, that has helped to formulate your view of what a good leader or a bad leader is. And I want to engage in a little bit of self-reflection regarding what leadership means to you and how you define leadership and how that impacts your own leadership style. So I've thrown up on the screen just a few examples of leaders and what we might think about when we think about leaders. So these are all very high profile leaders, some business owners, one of my personal favorites, the Raptors head coach, Nick Nurse, politicians. In your top right corner, that's Tarana Burke. She was the leader of the Me Too movement. And again, they've all been coined as leaders, socially, environmentally, in some sort of way. They've also been praised for their leadership. They've also been scrutinized for their leadership in many different facets. And that does, again, help us to formulate what is a good leader and what is a bad leader from, how do we view leaders in the media, for example. But I also want you to take these leaders and also start thinking about, when you do think about leadership, what does come to mind? And I just want you to consider, your view of leadership. How has leadership been defined for you socially and systematically throughout your life? How were you taught about leadership when you were growing up? For example, did you have a certain coach in your life that, you viewed as a leadership? It was a very early manifestation of leadership in front of you, and that really impacted how you viewed a good or a bad leader. Were you told from a young age that you were born to be a leader, or you're maybe not a natural born leader, which can be, again, very detrimental. So really think about and reflect, what's your view of leadership, and how have your personal experiences really formulated that? And that's going to bring us to just a quick 3-minute reflection and a participation moment. So get your fingers all warmed up and start typing in the chat, but I really want you all to reflect on some of the experiences that you've had with leaders. So again, think about your former manager, a former coach, a teacher, professor, or a supervisor, and think about how these leaders have impacted or formulated your view of what a good or a bad leader is. And would just love to sure you all share your thoughts and reflections in the chat, and Elizabeth is going to share with me when you do type them in, but it can be just something really brief. Just to get to your thoughts rolling, I can give you an example. So as was mentioned, I've been a volleyball player. I was a volleyball player for my entire life, and I started playing when I was probably 10 years old. And again, that means I did have coaches growing up. And I remember I had this particular coach, when I was 11, 12, 13, and they had a certain demeanor. They were loud on the bench. They were not afraid to yell at us. They were chucking clipboards and, getting really amped up on the side of the court. They were very loud. They were very dominant. And that is how they chose to lead us. And I always think back to that, especially when I started my coaching journey later on. How did that really impact what I viewed as being a good or a bad coach? And how was my experience with that person? And I remember for a long time, I thought, okay, this is how a coach acts. They have to be the loudest person in the gym, and they have to be the most dominant personality in the gym. And that's how I viewed coaches for a very, very long time. And then that was a big disconnect for me when I started coaching, and I realized, I'm not really like that. So does that make me a good coach, or does that make me a bad coach? Does that fit me in the box of being a coach? So I want you to think about that. And Elizabeth, have we received anything in the chat or any thoughts so far?
I think there might still be a reflection mode, and certainly listening to your example might help to kind of formulate those thoughts as well. So let's just pause maybe for a little bit and see what comes through. And as a reminder for participants, that questions box in your GoToWebinar panel is where you're able to reach out to us and send in your reflections.
Thank you. That's perfect. I'll give about a 1.5 minute pause here, and if Elizabeth doesn't share anything with me, then we can just move on. But just an opportunity to share some thoughts here.
Someone must have been typing while we just chatted. We have a response here. A good leader has passion for what they are leading and are able to make decisions, but those decisions are also based on input from participants.
I love that. Yeah, that just inclusive type of leadership and the passion, that's really important. I think what we're going to talk about is, passion might be a key pillar of leadership, but it's really just about how do you show that passion? Is it through a certain emotional response? Is it through your discipline to what you do and how you lead your team or what your team is trying to achieve every single day? So really, how does that passion show up?
Absolutely, and we've gotten a couple more in, which is great. Cool. So looking out for the benefit of those they serve, and someone else has shared, someone who identified growth opportunities for me, showing an understanding of my skills and what I could become.
I love that. Again, that dedication to your growth. And I love that because that's really interesting. Because that can be a toss-up in terms of different personal experiences. And I found that, I definitely have that certain, leadership value. I really value that. I really value helping the people that I supervise, the athletes that I used to coach, for example, really grow and develop as people, as athletes, as professionals. And that does require some pushing, right? It does require some challenging, and it does require, motivating others to get out of their comfort zone. And sometimes that can be met with an adverse reaction if that individual is not ready for that. So that's really interesting.
And then another one has come in. So for me, good leaders have always felt confident to reach out with pre-emotive information about support and genuine affirmation. It's okay to take it to team members they see struggling, especially when the team member was trying to obscure and carry the burden themselves.
That's really interesting too, that affirmation piece, just really acknowledging the different effort from different team members. I think that's fabulous. Okay, thank you. You could sense that I was a little bit insecure. I didn't know if I was going to get any participation, so thanks for that.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's awesome. So that's great, and I think it's a good reflection period, and I encourage all of you to, expand that reflection, right? Think about your experiences and think about, have you started to emulate some of those behaviors, and have you started to reflect some of those behaviors from what you've learned in the past in your own leadership? And is that really is that a great alignment for you as a person, or are you trying to be a leader that you've had in the past just because it's all you know? So it's just something to think about, and that's something that I encourage us all to go through, especially as we start talking about leading authentically. So that being said, I love talking about this because I love bringing us back to the actual definition of what a leader is. And there's two definitions that I really like here. So the first one is that leadership is the process of social influence, which maximizes the effort of others towards the achievement of a common goal. And the second one I like is the art of motivating a group of people to act towards a common goal. And I love these definitions because they're very objective. They're really just, at its core, leadership is just simply about motivating a collective towards a goal or a target. And again, what I love about this is that none of these definitions mention anything about certain behaviors. It doesn't mention anything about personality traits. It doesn't mention anything about how the leader chooses to motivate someone, right? And so I think this is really important for us to remember, because as we develop as leaders, as we potentially groom high potentials to be leaders, we think about leadership as being accessible to everyone, right? Not just simply those that maybe they're the loudest, most dominant people in the room, or maybe they're the ones that choose to work the longest and carry the rest of the team's weight, right? So it's just simply about what is your style and what path are you going to take to be able to motivate your team in the most effective way. Okay. So that gets us into an overview of the theory that we're going to be talking about, which is authentic leadership theory. And I'll get into this along with some practical examples here. But authentic leadership theory, so this study and this practice, it's been around since around the 1960s. There's been quite a few different theories, conceptual definitions of what authentic leadership is. I'm choosing to use one by a man named Bill George. He was a former Harvard business professor, and he wrote this book in 2003 called Authentic Leadership: Rediscovering the Secrets to Creating Lasting Value. And I really like the model that he proposes as being as defining what authentic leadership is, because I think it's just really simple to understand, and it also provides professionals with actionable and practical tools to be able to get there. I love this quote from them about having the capacity to inspire and empower others, but the root and the core of Bill George's theory is all about knowing yourself and understanding who you are so deeply that you're able to leverage that within your leadership style. Okay. So again, we've talked about leadership. There's many different leadership theories out there, and there's many different styles of leadership. I'm sure many of you have gone through different leadership development and training sessions, and they often direct participants to a specific leadership style by describing the leadership style, listing the traits of successful leaders, and then suggesting that participants adopt those particular traits and that particular style. So it's important to be educated in certain leadership theories and certain leadership styles. But one of the problems with perhaps all individuals in an organization or all participants of this leadership style that these training sessions are proponents of is that it can be inauthentic, because it's pushing you to emulate certain traits that may not be in line with who you are as a person. And if you're constantly trying to emulate other types of leaders, other types of styles that are not natural to who you are, what comes across is a lack of genuity and a lack of authenticity. And that in turn can lead to a lack of trust or a lack of vulnerability or expended energy on trying to be somebody that you might not be, rather than focusing on the job at hand. So this is why we're talking about how can we be really authentic leaders and filter who we are through these 5 different pillars of authentic leadership, which is what Bill George coins, what we'll be talking about in a little bit more detail. Okay. So Bill George's theory here, there's 5 different pillars that he discusses. So they're all about understanding your purpose and having a passion for the purpose, what you're striving towards, what you're motivating your team to do. Having really strong values and showcasing them, making it really known what your values are. Leading with your heart, so being compassionate towards the people that you're working with and who are part of your team, knowing that they're all complex individual human beings that all have needs, and and, understanding and leading with empathy. Establishing relationships, so building deep relationships with who you work with and knowing your team, not as deeply, but almost as deeply as you know yourself. And practicing self-discipline. So really showcasing that you have a plan and you're disciplined towards, within that plan towards achieving your goals. Okay. And again, what I love about this theory is that there's 5 different pillars of what is required. Again, based on Bill George's theory here. There's 5 different pillars that are part of being an authentic leader, but it doesn't suggest any specific behavioral or personality traits. So it's really just a filter, right? Of, who you are as a person filtered through these 5 pillars. And, they might all look different depending on who the person is, but these are what authentic leaders all have in common. And we'll go through each of them. What's our time here? All right. Make sure I'm not talking too much. So the first pillar is, again, about understanding your purpose. So an authentic leader showcases a really strong understanding for their unique purpose as a leader. And they have a really strong sense of passion in their practice and what they're doing. So they're excited about the things that they're doing. They're excited about the challenges that come about. They're excited about, here's this new engagement, this new initiative, this new goal that we have together. And they showcase that level of passion, right? There's nothing more demotivating than having a leader that's like, okay, like, here we go. Big boss told me that I got to do XYZ project with my team. Like, let's just get through it, right? There's nothing more demotivating than that because, as a leader, your demeanor, your mannerisms, your view of things, it's going to impact the rest of your team. More than likely, they're going to turn to you about, what's the vibe? What's the overall feel of this project or this initiative? How should I act, right? So it's just about showcasing that level of inspiration and showcasing that level of passion so that it inspires and motivates the rest of your team. It doesn't matter what that purpose is. Maybe you're really excited about a certain part of an engagement or a certain goal or, a certain aspect of what you're trying to achieve that is very specific and is not common to everybody else, but at least you're showcasing that level of passion and you're showcasing that it's okay to be excited and passionate about what we're doing. Okay. There's a lot of writing on here. I think you all are getting the slides after this, so you can take a look at it. Strong values. This is one of my favorite parts of authentic leadership theory. So an authentic leader has really specific values and high ethical standards. And they behave in a way that's always in line with those values. And they articulate regularly that those values won't be compromised. This is super important because, for one thing, I think it takes deep reflection to understand what do you value as a person or what do you value as a leader, right? And this is where I encourage you to reflect on the previous leaders that you've had in the past because, I know that I had a coach for many years that had specific values. And as a result of being his athlete for quite a few years, I think I embodied those values, or I took on those values as my own and thought, well, that's what he did. So like, I must value that because that's how I viewed him as a really great leader. I really respected him as a leader. Those were his values. But as I come into my own, I'm realizing that we're not always aligned, and that's okay. Right. And so I think it requires a lot of really deep reflection to think about, like, what do I value as a person? Right? What do I tolerate as a human being? And so I encourage you to think really specifically about that. The other piece that is really important about this aspect is it has to be known. And this increases your level of predictability as a leader, because there's nothing more stressful than your team being uncertain about how you're going to act and what you stand for, especially when we're dealing with something like this, dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, right? Things change every single day. I work with a lot of government organizations and nonprofits with my professional life. And, their mandate is really, really affected by the decisions of the government. And so things are changing every single day. And so there's nothing more stressful than, in a very uncertain environment, being uncertain about what your leader stands for and how they're going to react, especially in times of turmoil, especially in times of crisis. So making that very known, what you stand for and what your values are. Leading with heart. So this might seem, like obvious, but for most people or some people might not be, right? So there's that willingness to really show compassion and genuine concern to your team. And you remain sensitive to their personal issues and you check in on them regularly, right? So, nothing could be more relevant, especially over the past 2 years. Checking in on, what specific issue is or challenge maybe that my team members are going through, especially again with COVID. Depending on the person's personal situation or personal life, maybe they're a new parent, maybe they are caring for somebody, maybe they have a spouse that, COVID regulations make their work really hard or it's just really impacted. So everything is so specific, right? Just the small niches of life have all been impacted by COVID. And your experience is not necessarily another person's. And so it's really important to continuously check in, show up to those conversations without a personal bias so you can really authentically listen to them, right? And again, of course, showing that compassion, showing that empathy towards them. I do have a cautionary piece here, leadership burnout. I work with a lot of essential services, particularly mental health agencies. And when I showed them this part, they were like, yeah, like obviously, like, are you kidding me? That's what I do. I'm a therapist, I'm a social worker. So I did put this cautionary piece just about, you do have to show compassion to your team, but also ensuring that you're doing the things to show compassion to yourself. And you're relying on your community and relying on your team when you need to as well, because leader burnout is of course a real thing, especially during this time. All right, establishing relationships. This is again another key piece here. Establishing real connections with your people and your team and those around you in the organization. And sometimes it doesn't come naturally to some people, especially if you're not, maybe you're not a super social person. Maybe you are choosing to, you're more of a private person. You don't like to mix your work and personal life. Those are fine. Those are all personal choices and just natural tendencies within you. But just knowing that, if you build deeper relationships through, asking people about what they're going through in their life, having them share their personal thoughts, then also yourself sharing this, other similar pieces of information or giving your team a look into who you are as a person, it really does build, a genuine and deep relationship with them. And we all know that, the deeper relationship that somebody has with a leader, the less likely they are maybe to leave the organization, right? Again, at the end of the day, leadership is really just about relationships. All right. And practicing self-discipline. So it's interesting because I always view like purpose and strong values as being kind of intertwined in this theory, leading with heart and establishing relationships as being a little bit coinciding, and then practicing self-discipline is its own little island here. And some people might find that just to be super easy and they struggle with the rest of the pillars, or they do a really great job with the other pillars and it comes very naturally to them. But sitting down and coming up with a plan and holding people accountable to that plan can be difficult, right? That requires difficult conversations, that requires critical conversations. But remember that as a leader, people are looking to you to make decisions and people are looking to you to have a plan and they're looking to you to provide certainty, right? And keep people on track. So you need to showcase that level of self-discipline to your plan, your practice, your professional life to achieve your individual goals and the goals of the collective to make it easier for your team to follow you, right? There's this other piece too, staff is feeling confident and calm when they see a leader with self-discipline. And, you remain confident and calm in potentially times of turmoil, right? And so they can look to you to feel this sense of peace and this sense of calmness within you. And so, you're able to discipline yourself in your reaction to certain things and thinking about what that looks like and, the levels of emotions that you choose to show and when's a good time to show certain emotions and when's a good time to remain confident, calm, and you're unmovable so that they can feel that they can rely on you. Okay, so that's the end of that piece, the theory. That's a lot. It's a lot of information, and you might be thinking, so what? Like, how does this really impact my team? Or, what's the point? I mean, this is a really great leadership style or persona that's easier for me to follow. So I want to talk about some benefits and how it could potentially impact your team, the more that you show up authentically and the more genuinely that you show up with the team that you lead. Okay. So a couple pieces here. I love this quote. It's from another academic paper just about authentic leadership, just about, who you are as a human. That's what you must be. That's how you must act in the world, because that's what you were put on this earth to be. So 4 pieces here that showcase some positive impacts of authentic leadership with an organization. The first, again, is building trust, right? If I show up genuinely and authentically with you, I'm showing up the same in all facets of my leadership and all aspects of my life, you're going to learn to trust me, right? There's this one quote that I read, I think it was on Twitter actually, and it was about authenticity means that the more that you poke holes in things, the more the same stuff comes out, right? So you're not, attempting to emulate or showcase a certain persona, throughout your entire leadership practice, because A, that takes energy, and B, you're acting, right? It takes a lot of work, and especially under times of stress, all of that's going to wash away, and the true you is going to come out, and then that's inconsistency with your team. So the more that you show up the same and authentically and genuinely, and you're unapologetically showing up in that way, the more your team is able to trust you, right? Psychological safety. It's funny, I was hesitant to use this term because I think it's overused, especially in the past 2 years, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think it resonates with many people. But if I'm seeing you be, if I'm part of your team and I'm viewing you as a leader, being authentically yourself and vulnerable and just, not trying to be anybody else, I feel safe to do the same. Right? I feel you're setting the tone. Remember, as a leader, whether you like it or not, you have a responsibility to set the tone. And the more that you behave in that way, the more it says that it's okay for me to behave in that way too. And then I don't have to, put on a front, or I don't have to try to emulate yourself or another leader that you're trying to emulate. And it takes less stress off of me. And I feel like I can, come to work and be who I am at home. Right? So that psychological safety piece, again, reduces stress, reduces burnout, and allows you, again, just to feel generally happier with your time on the team. Higher retention rates. So I mentioned this earlier with the establishing relationships piece. The deeper relationships that you have with your staff members, the greater desire that they have to stay in an organization. Right. And so again, that all intertwines with, do they trust you? Do they feel that you have their best interests in mind? Do you stress me out as a leader because I don't know how you're going to act in certain ways? I don't know how you're going to react to certain situations. Right. So the more confident and calm I feel, and the more that I trust you, the longer I'm going to want to stay in an organization, because that, again, is a rare thing. And empowerment of team members. This kind of goes hand in hand with the psychological safety piece. So, again, the less time that you're spending trying to emulate somebody else or something else, the more time you can spend on other things, such as coaching and motivating others. And, you can just genuinely show up as yourself. You're not expending energy on anything else. As well, it also empowers team members to do the same. So it empowers team members to be themselves. It empowers team members to show up authentically. I don't have to try to be somebody else when I come to work. And I feel more calm and confident in myself because it is welcomed and celebrated in my place of employment. Okay, so a couple pieces here, a couple positive impacts. I'm sure the list goes on, and there's many, many different elements that could benefit, that could come from this, but these are just some main ones. Okay, and then last but not least, some tools, because I'm not going to leave you with a theory and some examples without telling you some ways to be able to achieve this. So the first is part of the handout that I believe is on this webinar. Elizabeth will share where it is and how to access it after this. It is also going to be shared in the materials after the webinar as well. But these 8 key questions are based on Bill George's authentic leadership theory. And I shouldn't say 8 key questions, it's like 8 key elements of a set of questions to really help you engage in your reflective practice. And they're all based on different facets that contribute to the theory. So the first is, learning from your life story, right? Reflecting on your life experiences as a child, as a adolescent, as a teenager, as a young adult, new in your career. What did you experience? How has this really impacted you? I talk all the time about my time as an athlete, right? That really, really impacted me. It impacted my decision to study something at school. It impacted the career that I've gone through. It impacted how I think of certain situations, how I approach challenges, but also my specific experience as an athlete too. Assisted me in building resilience, experiences that I had with teammates, right? That all made me who I am today, and it really shaped what I value in life. Knowing your authentic self. So asking yourself, what are the scenarios that I feel most like myself? What environments do I feel most like myself? When do I feel like I can show up as genuinely and authentically as possible? And what aspects of your environment, who am I with, that contributes to that, right? Practicing your values and principles. Again, love this part. I think it takes a lot of work to really identify what you do truly value, because again, we can just spew out things that we've been told that we're supposed to value. But it's really just about reflecting on your behaviors. Think about the last time that somebody really rubbed you the wrong way. What happened? Why was that? What was the root cause behind that? And that can really give you some insights into what you truly value as a person. Balancing your extrinsic and intrinsic motivations. So what are you intrinsically motivated by, and what external factors really motivate you? Is it money? Is it a work environment? Is it people? Or is it the work that I'm doing? Is it my passions? Is it my goals in life, right? So what are my key motivators, and how does that tailor the way that I show up, when I'm a leader at work, but also in all other facets of my life. Those are some reflective pieces of these key questions. The last 4 pieces are more actionable and thinking about a plan. So the 5th is all about building your support team, right? After you've done these reflective pieces, who around you can you build as like what we like to call your board of directors, your advisors? Who's going to hold you accountable? Who can you turn to when you have a leadership question? Right? Who are these key mentors that you have for yourself and can help you along this journey? Integrate your life. So do you show up the same in all facets of your life? In personal, with your partner, with your family, at your job, in your extracurricular hobbies, all facets of your life, do you show up the same? Right? Is this authentic style integrated across all aspects? What does authenticity mean to you? So some reflective questions here about why is this important to me? And it also assists you in how you coach and work with other people on your team. And then the next steps. So what are some action items that I can take to either sustain this, start this, or move forward? Okay, so that's all included on a handout. It's a series of reflective questions. I think for each pillar, there's about 3 to 4 questions, so it's a lot. So I encourage you to take some time on this, okay? And also share it back with people that you trust, right? Bounce these ideas off some of these people. And then secondly, I mentioned my love for psychometric assessments. I think everybody should be using them. I'm assuming that, most professionals, so many years in their career, they've probably taken at least something like this. Those of you who don't know what a psychometric assessment is, the lay term is, personality test. So if you've ever taken a Myers-Briggs, have you ever taken, the MBTI, what assessment have you taken that tells you, are you an ENFJ or an INTP, or what's your type, right? So those are some assessments that are really popular that might come to mind when we think about this. But the reason why I really recommend psychometric assessments is that assessments measure individual tendencies, and they provide you with data in terms of who you are as a person. And it's literally a cheat sheet into who you are as a human, and like what comes naturally to you, what causes you stress. I'll never forget my very first job outside after my master's was for an assessment firm. And I, of course, had, learned about assessments throughout my psychology degree, throughout my master's. I'd taken a whole course on it. But I started working for an assessment firm. And part of the hiring process, which is often what assessments are used for, but part of the hiring process, of course, for this firm was that I took the assessment. And I remember going through my debrief, and I'll talk about which assessment it is in a second, but I remember going through my debrief, and it was very detailed. It was very, there's a lot of, I think it measured like 20 different traits. And when the consultant was going through it with me, I was like, oh my gosh, like this just makes so much sense, right? It just makes sense as to why certain things come really easily to me, certain things don't. I'll give you an example. This particular assessment measured detail orientation. right? And how cautious you were. And so I, fresh out of my master's, was reading academic papers, was writing my thesis. And I always used to think like, wow, maybe I'm just a bad student because like reading these papers, I get so tired reading them. I can't like gauge the information, it doesn't stick in my brain. I can't remember certain citations. The information doesn't stick with me. And I always thought like, maybe I'm just a really bad student. And what the assessment told me is that detail orientation is not very natural to me. I have to try really hard to focus on the details, and I have to try really hard to focus on little key things little key pieces of information that I'm reading in a 40-page academic paper, while I'm balancing 20 other papers that I have to read that week and writing my thesis and doing all these other things. So I'm expending energy in some other areas. I don't have the energy to expend on this particular paper. Therefore, I get tired. It doesn't stick with me, and I have to try a lot harder to really, gauge this information. And so that just made my life make sense. And now I live my life knowing that I don't have this level of orientation. I do have to set aside time to make sure that I remain super detailed and I remain super meticulous on projects and certain things that matter. Right? So that's just an example, but it really is a cheat sheet into knowing who am I as a person. What are the areas that come very naturally to me? How can I leverage them as I begin to identify and develop my authentic leadership style? And then, some of the literature says that, for the areas that don't come naturally to you, let's spend extra time and more purposeful energy practicing those skills. And yes, that's one piece, but another piece you can do is also build a team to help you with those areas that come tough to you, right? If you're super extroverted, assertive, empathetic, you're a very, personable leader, but focusing on like the numbers and the metrics and process doesn't come easily to you, build your team around you to help you do that, right? And you motivate them and work with them and you're compassionate towards them along the way. So again, always recommend using psychometrics. Here's a couple that I really like for many reasons. So Caliper is one of my favorites on the market. It's incredibly rigorous. It's one of the most scientifically valid assessments on the market. It measures 20 plus traits, and it gives a really, really accurate response. I also really like Hogan as well. Hogan's a great one. I think it's a little bit more accessible than Caliper. Caliper is a little bit more on the expensive side. And the Berkman for team assessments. So if we want to get real deep, and I'm not going to start talking about team assessments because you won't shut me up, and I think I've only got about 15 minutes. So if you want to get really deep into team dynamic and team personality and data on who your team is, I really like the Berkman for this piece. So these are just some examples to look into. Maybe there's an assessment that you can take that's, not super costly and can just assist you in understanding more about yourself as a person and as a leader. All right. And that's it. That's it from me. So Elizabeth, I can turn the mic over to you if you want. Let me know if you want me to stop sharing my screen. But thank you all for listening. That was really fun to hear me ramble for 35 minutes.
Thank you so much, Erica, for that wonderful presentation. A lot to think about, reflect on, and really take that time to think about personal experiences, what shaped you, what can we bring forward. So thank you so much for that today. You can keep sharing your screen. We'll leave it up at the Q&A slide to make things easy. And
Cool.
I'll kick things off in the Q&A section here. So how can you begin to create or practice, cultivate that self-discipline you spoke about if that's something that actually doesn't come naturally to you? Is there tips, tricks, tools, resources that you might be able to point our audience to?
Yeah, I love that. So two pieces that come to mind right away. One is figure out what motivates you. So, and what I mean by that is, are you somebody, and again, an assessment can help you figure this out, just a tip, but are you somebody that's really, really motivated by goals? And not everybody is, and it's not a bad thing, right? And what I mean by that is when you set a target for yourself, maybe you're in a role that requires like certain KPIs, sales, etc. When you set a target for yourself, do you wake up every morning and you're like, oh my God, like I am so excited to continue working towards this goal? Or when your supervisor says, you have to do X, Y, and Z by this time? Does that really, really motivate you, setting those clear targets, right? Are you somebody that really enjoys problem solving? So are you motivated by figuring things out? And are you really motivated by, working through a certain problem? Are you someone that really enjoys, what was the other piece that is another key motivator here? Are you somebody that's really motivated by serving other people, right? Is that your key motivator? Are you a leader because you love helping your team and you love understanding what they're going through and their challenges? So these are some examples of certain motivators. I would really encourage you to figure that out first, because it just makes your life so much easier when it comes to cultivating that level of self-discipline and routine. Because if you attach it to whatever your key motivator is, it's going to be a lot easier to stay disciplined to that. One example for me is I'm very goal oriented. So, if I have to figure out, if I set discipline or create plans around me having to figure something out, I don't like doing that. I don't want to approach it. It's going to take me a long time. I'm also very impatient. I'm not going to do it. So, but I'm very goal oriented. So if I have to, say I really am forced to solve this issue, I break it down into tiny little targets and tiny little goals to help me stay disciplined and stay motivated in that way. If you're that service oriented person, a little bit more difficult to kind of nail down. But if you can help stay disciplined by reframing your mind into knowing that, like, the more I stay disciplined, the greater service I'm offering to my team. I'm keeping them accountable. I'm decreasing their stress. I'm helping them feel like they have a goal, they have a target, they know what to do. That can help you stay a little bit more disciplined. But I encourage you to start with those motivators and then develop a routine around it.
That's a great tip, I think, around kind of reframing, and maybe you don't even need to think of it as self-discipline. It's more thinking about this is bringing me forward to X. If it's, like you said, that self-serving or, sorry, serving your team or goal orientation, I think that's a really great reframing way to help cultivate and build that. If it's not natural to you. So next question, just thinking about perhaps some advice that you would give to someone that might be trying to break habits from a leadership style that maybe is from a past idea of leader, or maybe is not feeling so authentic to who they are anymore, particularly maybe if those leadership style that's not feeling so authentic to you is supported by your organization.
That's a tough one. That's a really tough one, especially if it's encouraged by your organization and being that type of leader. So I have two suggestions. One, talk to a mentor or coach or leader at your organization, if you have one, about how you're feeling. Sharing that. I know this is encouraged. I know this is a key part of maybe the organizational culture. It really doesn't feel like me. And it actually detracts from my focus on my job, because I'm so worried about emulating these particular behaviors and traits. It takes a lot of energy. And see what they say, right? They may be very open to knowing that, okay, maybe your traditional style doesn't typically align with our culture. Can we work through that? And can we support you as you figure out your own authentic style? So that's one example that I would have. And again, sharing it with that coach or mentor or leader to help you help them hold you accountable and stay supported throughout that journey is one piece. The other aspect is, if you have that conversation and they don't seem supportive, this might not be the organization for you, right? It's if you feel like the culture or the style of leaders that they really support and encourage is not in line with who you are as a person, you'd probably be a lot happier trying to find an organization or a place of work that aligns with who you are.
That's wonderful. Thanks for that. And just kind of breaking that question out a little bit. So perhaps it's someone who, like taking the organization piece out of it, just personally, perhaps, as you've actually mentioned, there was a leader that maybe you're emulating, and as you grow and think it's not quite right for you. So just even that individualistic approach as well of kind of making that shift for yourself if you're feeling some kind of habits you took along with you for the ride aren't feeling so right anymore.
Yeah. So that starts with, I don't have like a therapeutic training or anything like that, but I am somewhat familiar. That does start with, again, first of all, making that choice to commit to your own leadership journey, right? I'm making the the active choice to not emulate this previous leadership style anymore because it's just not who I am. And then it's about, engaging in tons and tons of, again, self-reflection, right? What's important to you as a leader? What kind of leader do I want to be? Where do I feel the happiest, right? Leverage those 8 questions that I did share with you as a starting point to at least just get to know yourself better. And a lot of it also comes with self affirmations and kind of hyping yourself up, right? Because oftentimes, especially, and I'm just speculating here, but especially if that, maybe you haven't spent a lot of time developing your own personal style because you've been told like this is the right way, there is going to be that little bit of dissonance that's like, well, does my style matter? Or like, am I important? Like, should I just try to be like that other person? And so as you go through that journey, you also have to engage in positive affirmations that, yeah, like this is important. I can come up with or figure out who I am. Who I am is important and what I value is important. And it's worth trying to reflect on it and figure it out.
And that also maybe leads to building that support board of directors, I think you mentioned too, that can
Yeah,
help kind of in that journey as well.
absolutely.
Wonderful. So the next question is again a bit of a balancing act perhaps between your own maybe authentic behaviors, these leadership things that as we're talking today, but also realizing that there's an individualistic approach to your team that needs to be met as well. So what might feel right to you in your interactions or things might not be right for each team member. So how do you balance that?
I love this because it's a conversation about empathetic leadership, and it's actually something I struggled with for a long time when I was a new coach. Because I had a team of, so just for context, I spent some time coaching girls volleyball at a really competitive level, and they were 17. And so they all have, they're all figuring themselves out and just embarking on a journey to figure themselves out, but they all have certain needs, right? And certain tendencies. And I struggled with this because my view initially was going into it like, I want to be empathetic to the certain style that works with each athlete. And I want to be empathetic to each athlete's needs. So I committed to figuring out and asking and having conversations like, okay, how does this person like to be coached? How does this person like to be led? And that was exhausting, right? It was somewhat helpful. I definitely built some really deep relationships, but in actuality, I built the strongest relationships with the athletes that needed leadership styles that were most aligned with who I was, because I was like, oh, this is easy. Like it's natural, right? And they saw that version of me throughout all facets of the team. And so I learned that lesson at a pretty young age. I was in my early 20s when I started coaching, and it was like some pretty hard lessons, like slap in the face. And that was one of them. And so, in my view, you know, there's a balance between inclusivity of needs of an individual, but then also doing what's best for the team. And if you can figure out a balance of what's our team collectively trying to achieve, what's our team charter, for example, how do we collectively agree on working with each other? And then if you can figure out through your own style how to support that, you don't have to be everything to everyone. And if somebody really struggles with the way that you lead and they just like it doesn't work that way, A, maybe they need to figure out how they can be a bit more flexible. B, maybe they need a separate mentor outside of you, because that's fine. Like, I've had leaders in the past that didn't adhere to all my needs, and what they set me up with somebody that does, and now I'm balanced, right? So that's another piece. Or perhaps maybe they don't belong on your team, right? Maybe it's just maybe maybe they're totally derailing the team, right? Maybe there's somebody that is really focused on their own individual tendencies or needs, and it's actually derailing the team's progress. So those are some thoughts that you have to, have and think about and practice, and also just be okay with making the decision to be who you are and not try to be everything to everyone.
I love that final note you just said, not trying to be everything for everyone, because I think
Yeah.
that can be a bit of a trap that we fall in, and perhaps even more so in in these times as we try even harder to be there for everyone, just with the times we're living in and all of those unknowns and things like that. So we have time for just one more question, so I'll end it off here, and then we'll wrap up for the day with some last minute housekeeping things. So another point that potentially might feel dissonant for some is when you spoke about being kind of that calm force for the team, but then also being kind of being true to your emotions and sharing your authentic self as well. So just kind of maybe talking a little bit about expansion on that dissonance, particularly again thinking about the times we're in right now, where perhaps the right option is to be vulnerable and say, I'm nervous too, or this threw me, or I'm tired of the news as well. So just wanting to talk about that potential dissonance a little bit.
I love that. Yeah. And I know that we only have a minute, so I'll try to keep this short. But yeah, so that is a bit of a strategic decision that you have to make. And it has to do with, okay, so again, firstly, understanding how you'd react. If you're somebody that naturally is just like, I'm calm, cool, collected, run with it, right? Then you kind of work on that. If you're somebody that's naturally emotional and reactive, I'm somebody like that, then you gotta start from that base. So first it's about understanding, okay, how am I reacting, or what's my natural reaction to this? The second piece is understanding who's on your team, right? Do you have a team that, that they think that they would, or that you think that they would react better to, you having maybe an emotional reaction, because they're like, oh, like at least somebody is like validating my feelings, right? Or like, they're experiencing this too. Or do you have a team that's like pretty calm, cool, collected? Maybe their, feelings and emotions are not their thing, self-proclaimed. Some people are like that. Then they're not gonna know how to react to your reaction, right? Then you got to manage that. So it's about knowing your team and knowing what's the best thing for them. What do you think that they need in this time? And then the final piece, I think, is going off of that. If you have to bend yourself, or manage yourself and your reaction for the other team, how can you balance it? So for example, if they're like a calm, cool, collected team and you're someone that's emotionally reactive, sure, if you feel like you can have that emotional response, or you feel like you have that reactive response, or maybe you can't help it, but then you balance it out with like, okay, that was a little bit like, I had a little bit of a moment, but at the end of the day, we're going to be fine. And yes, I'm acknowledging the severity of the situation, but here's our plan moving forward. That can kind of ease some minds a little bit. That's usually the response that I'd like to go for most of the time. Because I think it validates emotions, it validates feelings. That's natural for me. And then it also is like, I'm not dwelling on those emotions. I still end up having that plan. So you can almost kind of do both in a sense. I hope that makes sense.
And it seems to tie back into that point you started with of around relationships and establishing that trust, establishing those relationships, so you can kind of have those authentic moments together, which is wonderful.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of this presentation, all of these great food for thought and reflections past this webinar, as well as the engagement within the Q&A session. We have come to the end of our webinar. I see that we're 1 minute over, so thank you so much for sticking with us. No, it's wonderful to have such great conversations. All of our webinars are created for public access and supported by memberships and funding sponsors. Thank you everyone for tuning in and continuing to follow the Work Wellness Institute. Thank you so much, Erica, for your time and expertise, and hopefully we'll see you all in the future. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.